The wind cut through the November evening like a knife. Outside Carnegie Hall in New York City, people rushed past in their expensive coats and polished shoes. Barely noticing the old man sitting against the cold stone wall, James Mitchell pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. At 67 years old, he'd learned that the city's coldest chill didn't come from the weather. It came from the way people looked right through you, as if you didn't exist at all. His cardboard sign rested against his knees. The words were written in careful, neat handwriting. "Can I play for food?" A small paper cup sat in front of him, holding a few coins that people had tossed without stopping. Most didn't even look at his face. James watched the stream of concert-goers arriving for the evening performance. Women in sparkling dresses stepped out of taxis. Men in dark suits checked their watches and hurried toward the entrance. The warm glow from inside the concert hall spilled onto the sidewalk, but none of that warmth reached where James sat. "Look at this guy," a voice said above him. James glanced up to see a man in his 30s wearing a suit that probably cost more than James had seen in 6 months. The man was with 3 friends, all dressed the same way, all holding their phones. "Can I play for food, really?" "That's a new one," his friends laughed. One of them, a woman with perfect makeup, shook her head. "These people will say anything. My doorman told me last week that some guy claimed he was a doctor who lost everything. It's always some story. Bet he's never touched a piano in his life," another one added, taking a sip from an expensive-looking coffee cup. James said nothing. He'd learned long ago that responding only made things worse. He kept his eyes down, focusing on his hands. They were scarred and weathered now, the skin rough from years of sleeping outside, from cold winters and hot summers with nowhere to go. But if you looked closely, you could still see that his fingers were long and graceful. "Pianist's fingers," his mother used to say. The group moved on, still laughing. Their voices faded into the noise of the city, the honking horns and rumbling subway beneath the streets. James let out a slow breath. He'd been sitting here for 3 hours, and his cup held maybe $4 in change. An elderly couple walked past. The woman glanced at James, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Pity, maybe, or recognition of shared humanity. She reached into her purse. "Don't," her husband said quietly, taking her arm. "They just spend it on alcohol. You're not helping them." The woman hesitated, then put her wallet away. They disappeared through the golden doors of Carnegie Hall. James closed his eyes. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by a different memory. He was 23 years old, in a small recreation hall on a military base in Germany. The piano was old and out of tune, but his fellow soldiers didn't care. They gathered around as he played, some singing along, others just listening with closed eyes, transported somewhere far from the base, far from the tension of deployment. "Play that one again, Mitchell," someone would always say. And he would, because in those moments he could give them something. A piece of home, a few minutes of peace. He'd been good back then, better than good. Before his first deployment, he'd been at Juilliard, studying under some of the best teachers in the world. "You have something special," his professor told him. "Something that can't be taught. You don't just play the notes. You make them mean something." But then came the second deployment, Afghanistan, the roadside bomb, the explosion that threw him 15 feet and filled his world with pain and ringing silence. When he woke up in the hospital, his right hand was wrapped in so many bandages he couldn't see it. The doctor said he was lucky to keep the hand at all. Lucky. That's what they called it. It took 2 years of painful rehabilitation before he could play again. His hand would never be the same. The scars ran deep through muscle and nerve, but he worked at it every single day, forcing his fingers to remember what they once knew. He almost made it back. Almost. He was playing again, not at the level he once had, but still beautiful. Still meaningful. He had a wife by then, Catherine, and a daughter, Lisa, who was 8 years old and learning piano herself. Then came the night that changed everything. A drunk driver running a red light. Catherine and Lisa were gone in an instant, and James was left alone with a grief so deep it had its own weight, its own gravity that pulled him down and wouldn't let go. The PTSD from the war, the phantom pains in his hand, the crushing loss of his family, it all became too much. He started drinking to silence the memories. Then he couldn't stop. Lost his apartment. Lost his connections in the music world. Lost everything except the knowledge in his fingers and the music that still lived somewhere deep inside him. That was 7 years ago. A loud burst of laughter brought James back to the present. More people were arriving for the concert, a steady stream of New York's wealthy and cultured. He wondered what they were seeing tonight. Probably something beautiful, something that would move them, at least for the 2 hours they sat in those comfortable seats. A young woman dropped $1 into his cup without looking at him. "Thank you," James said quietly, but she was already gone. His eyes drifted to the posters in the concert hall windows. Tonight's performance, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. James felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that piece, knew every note, every phrase, every place where the composer's heart broke open and spilled onto the page. He'd played it once, a lifetime ago, in this very hall, opening night of what was supposed to be his debut tour. He was 22 years old, fresh out of Juilliard, and the world was at his feet. The audience had given him a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. 5 minutes of pure, perfect validation that all his work, all his sacrifice had meant something. The stage door opened briefly, and James could hear it. The orchestra warming up, the random notes and scales that somehow sounded beautiful just because of where they were coming from, a violin's lonely melody, the low rumble of a cello, and there, cutting through it all, a piano playing a quick run of notes. James's fingers moved unconsciously, following the melody on his knee. Muscle memory from another life. A security guard near the entrance was watching him now. James recognized the look. He'd be asked to move along soon. They always asked eventually. Can't have homeless people in front of Carnegie Hall. Bad for business. But for just a moment longer, James let himself sit there and listen to the distant sound of the piano. He let himself remember what it felt like to be the one playing, to be the one creating beauty instead of begging for spare change on a cold sidewalk. The concert hall doors closed, sealing away the warmth and the music. The guard started walking his direction. James gathered his sign and his cup. Time to find somewhere else to spend the night. Somewhere the wind wouldn't cut quite so deep and the memories wouldn't follow quite so close. He stood slowly, his joints stiff from sitting on cold concrete. Tomorrow would be the same as today. And the day after that, this was his life now, and those golden doors would never open for him again. At least, that's what he thought. James had made it half a block when he heard the doors of Carnegie Hall open again. Intermission. The sidewalk filled with people in an instant, all of them holding wine glasses and talking loudly about the first half of the concert. He should have kept walking. Should have turned the corner and disappeared into the night. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the sound of that piano still echoing in his head. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Either way, he found himself standing there watching the crowd spill out onto the street. There he is. The voice came from behind him. James turned to see the same man from earlier, the one in the expensive suit. He was with his friends again, but now they all had champagne in their hands and that loose, confident look that comes from money and alcohol. The man walked right up to James, phone already out and recording.
"Hey, piano man."
"Still here?" James gripped his cardboard sign tighter but said nothing. "My friend Tyler here thinks I'm being too harsh," the man continued, gesturing to one of his companions. "He says maybe you really can play, so I've got a proposition for you." James could feel other people stopping to watch now. A small crowd was forming. This was entertainment to them. Something to talk about over drinks. "There's a piano right inside that lobby," the man said, pointing back at the concert hall. "Beautiful instrument. Probably worth more than everything you own. You play us something, anything decent, and I'll give you $100 right now. Cash." His friends laughed. One of them, a tall guy with perfectly styled hair, raised his champagne glass. "Make it 200. This I've got to see." "Come on, old man," the first one pressed. "You've got that sign, right? Can I play for food? Well, here's your chance. Show us what you've got." James looked at the ground. His heart was pounding. 7 years he'd kept this part of himself hidden. 7 years of walking past music stores and concert halls, of hearing pianos through open windows and forcing himself to keep moving. The music was still inside him, he knew that. But letting it out meant letting everything else out too. All the pain, all the memories, all the reasons he was standing here instead of being in there. "What's wrong? Can't do it?" The man stepped closer, and James could smell the expensive cologne mixed with champagne. "Just admit it. You can't play. You're just another guy with a sob story and a handout." Something stirred in James's chest. Not anger exactly. Something older and deeper than that. Pride maybe. Or just the exhausted defiance of a man who'd been pushed too far, too many times. He looked up and met the man's eyes. "I can play." The words came out quiet but steady. The small crowd that had gathered went silent. "Oh, this is perfect," one of the women said, already recording on her phone too. Several other people pulled out their phones. This was going to be all over social media in minutes, James realized. Either his humiliation or theirs. "Elena!" the man shouted toward the concert hall entrance. "Elena, come here!" A woman in a staff uniform emerged from the doors looking tired and annoyed. She was maybe 40, with kind eyes that had seen too much of the city's harsh reality. "Mr. Peterson, intermission is almost over. Whatever this is, this gentleman says he can play piano," the man, Peterson, said with exaggerated politeness. "I'd like to invite him inside to prove it. Just for a minute." "Come on, Elena. It's for a good cause. If he can actually play, I'll donate $500 to whatever charity you want." Elena looked at James, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Recognition of some kind, though not of who he was. Recognition of what he was, maybe. Someone at the end of their rope. Someone being backed into a corner for sport. "Sir," she said to James, ignoring Peterson, "you don't have to do this. I can have security escort these people back inside." "I'll do it," James said. The words surprised him as much as anyone else. Elena hesitated. "Are you sure?" James nodded. What did he have to lose? His dignity? That was already on the sidewalk with his cardboard sign. His pride? Gone years ago. Maybe this was what rock bottom looked like, being mocked by rich people outside a concert hall where he once performed to standing ovations. Or maybe, just maybe, this was something else. A chance to touch those keys one more time, to feel that connection again, even if it was in front of a crowd expecting him to fail. "Okay," Elena said finally. 5 minutes. "That's it. And you," she pointed at Peterson and his friends, "will behave yourselves or you'll be asked to leave the premises." The crowd followed them inside, growing larger by the second. People who'd been heading back to their seats for the second half stopped to watch. Whispers spread through the lobby. "Some homeless guy says he can play piano. This is going to be embarrassing. Someone call building security." The lobby of Carnegie Hall looked exactly as James remembered it. High ceilings, elegant chandeliers, and there, in the center, a beautiful grand piano that the venue kept for special occasions and donor events. James approached it slowly. Each step felt like walking through water. His legs didn't want to work right. His hands were shaking. Peterson and his friends positioned themselves right next to the piano, phones up, ready to capture every second of what they assumed would be a disaster. James reached the piano bench and sat down carefully. The leather was soft, so different from the concrete he'd been sitting on all evening. He looked at the keys, black and white, stretching out before him like a path he used to know by heart. His hands hovered over them, and suddenly he was back in that hospital bed, looking at the bandages, the doctor's serious face. "You may never play again, son." The damage to the nerves and tendons, but he had played again. Through pain that made him cry, through exercises that took hours every day, he'd forced his broken hand to remember. Then he was in the apartment, the one he'd shared with Catherine and Lisa, unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to do anything but stare at the piano in the corner and remember his daughter's laugh when she hit the wrong notes. "Any day now," Peterson said. Some people in the crowd laughed. James closed his eyes and took a breath. Then another. In Afghanistan, before missions, his sergeant used to say the same thing every time. "Whatever happens out there, you remember who you are. Remember what you're made of." He'd forgotten that. For 7 years, he'd forgotten. His fingers touched the keys. The lobby went completely silent. Even Peterson stopped smirking. James began to play. Not some simple tune. Not Chopsticks or Happy Birthday, or any of the easy pieces someone might play to prove a basic point. He played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece the orchestra was performing inside the concert hall. One of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. His scarred, weathered hands moved across the keys like they'd never stopped. Like 7 years of sleeping on sidewalks and digging through dumpsters had never happened. The muscle memory was still there, buried under all that pain and loss, just waiting. The notes filled the lobby, rich and powerful and impossibly beautiful. James's eyes stayed closed. He wasn't in the lobby anymore. He was everywhere the music took him. He was 22 again, performing for the first time on the big stage. He was on that military base playing for soldiers who needed hope. He was in his apartment teaching Lisa how to find middle C. The pain in his damaged hand started almost immediately, sharp and burning. But he pushed through it, let it fuel the music. Every scar, every loss, every night spent cold and alone on the streets poured into those notes. People in the lobby stood frozen. Champagne glasses hung forgotten in their hands. Phones kept recording, but now for a completely different reason. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, an elderly woman put her hand to her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes, because she recognized this playing. She'd heard it before, decades ago, from a young man who everyone said would change the world of classical music. The music swelled through the lobby like a living thing. James's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with a precision that seemed impossible for hands so weathered and scarred. The difficult passages, the ones that made professional pianists practice for months, flowed from him like breathing. Someone in the crowd gasped. Then another. The whispers started spreading backward through the growing audience. Oh my God, is this really happening? Who is he? Peterson's smug expression had vanished completely. His phone was still recording, but his hand had dropped to his side. He stood there with his mouth slightly open, looking like someone had just pulled the ground out from under his feet. James didn't notice any of it. He was lost in the music now, completely absorbed. His eyes remained closed, but somehow his fingers knew exactly where to go. The Rachmaninoff concerto was meant to be played with a full orchestra, but even alone on the piano, it filled the entire lobby with its power and emotion. The piece told a story. It always had. A story of longing and loss, of beauty found in the darkest moments, of hope that refuses to die no matter how hard life tries to kill it. James understood that story now in a way he never had before. When he was young and successful playing at Juilliard, he'd played the notes perfectly. But he hadn't lived them yet. He hadn't earned them. Now he had. Every measure carried weight. The soft parts spoke of quiet devastation, the kind that comes in the middle of the night when you're alone and there's no one left to pretend for. The loud crashing chords embodied rage and defiance, the refusal to disappear quietly, to be invisible, and running through it all was something else. Something that sounded like memory, like reaching for people who aren't there anymore, for a life that slipped through your fingers. The elderly woman who'd recognized his playing pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She was well-dressed, elegant, with white hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her hands trembled as she brought them to her lips. "It can't be," she whispered. "It can't be." The man next to her, wearing an expensive suit and a concert hall badge that read Board of Directors, leaned toward her. "Do you know him?" She couldn't answer. She just shook her head in disbelief, eyes fixed on James. Inside the concert hall, the orchestra had been preparing to start the second half. But several musicians had heard the piano through the walls. One by one, they'd slipped out to see what was happening. Now a violinist stood in the doorway, his instrument hanging loose in his hand, staring at James with undisguised awe. "That's impossible," he muttered to the cellist beside him. "The hand positions for this piece, the reach required. And he's playing it from memory?" The cellist, a woman who'd been performing professionally for 30 years, just nodded slowly. "I know. I'm watching it and I still don't believe it." James's damaged right hand was on fire now. The scars pulled with every stretch, every chord. Pain shot up his arm in waves. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This might be the last time he ever touched a piano. The last time he let himself be who he used to be, even for just a few minutes. The music built toward its climax, the emotional heart of the concerto, where everything the composer felt comes pouring out in a cascade of notes that sound like joy and heartbreak happening at the same time. James leaned into it, his whole body moving with the music now. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His breath came in short gasps between phrases, and then something happened that he didn't expect. The memories stopped hurting. For 7 years, every time he thought about playing piano, it came with crushing guilt. Guilt that he was still here when Catherine and Lisa weren't. Guilt that he'd survived the war when so many of his brothers in arms hadn't. Guilt that he'd let his life fall apart, that he'd wasted the gift he'd been given, but right now, in this moment, there was only the music. Pure and true and exactly what it needed to be. This was who he was, not the homeless man on the sidewalk, Not the broken soldier, not the grieving husband and father. This connection between his heart and his hands and the keys that made sound into meaning. The elderly woman finally pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She stood just a few feet from the piano now, and the look on her face was one of recognition so profound it seemed to physically hurt her. "James," she said softly, but he couldn't hear her over the music. "James Mitchell." Elena, the staff member who'd let him inside, stood off to the side with tears running down her face. She'd worked at Carnegie Hall for 15 years. She'd heard countless performances, seen the world's greatest musicians walk these halls, but she'd never seen anything like this. Never seen someone pour their entire soul into music the way this homeless man was doing. Peterson's friend, the tall one with the styled hair, lowered his phone. "We need to stop recording this," he said quietly. "What? Why?" Peterson asked, still stunned. "Because we're the villains in this story, man. Look at us. Look at what we were doing to him." James moved into the final section of the piece, the resolution, where after all the struggle and pain, the music finds something that sounds almost like peace. Not happiness exactly, not victory. Just the quiet acceptance that life breaks everyone, but some people keep going anyway. His fingers slowed, grew gentler. The notes became softer, more delicate. This was the part that always made people cry, because it was beautiful and sad at the same time. It acknowledged that some things can't be fixed. Some people can't come back. Some losses leave scars that never fully heal. But it also said that beauty still matters, that music still matters, that creating something meaningful even for a few minutes is worth the pain it costs. The final chord hung in the air. James played it softly, letting it fade naturally, his foot on the sustain pedal so the notes could ring out as long as possible. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. James opened his eyes slowly. The first thing he saw was his own hands on the keys, still trembling from exertion. The scars stood out white against his weathered skin. He'd done it. After 7 years, after everything, he could still play. Then he looked up. The lobby was packed. At least 100 people stood watching him, maybe more. Every single one of them was staring at him with expressions of shock, awe, and something else. Something that looked like respect. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath. Then someone started clapping. It was Elena. She stood off to the side, applauding with tears still wet on her cheeks. The violinist from the orchestra joined in, then the cellist, then the elderly woman in front clapping so hard her jewelry rattled, and then everyone. The entire lobby erupted in applause that echoed off the high ceilings. It wasn't polite concert applause. It was the kind of applause that happens when people witness something they know they'll remember for the rest of their lives. People were crying. Actually crying. A young woman near the back had her hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit wiped at his eyes with his sleeve, not caring who saw. Peterson stood frozen, his face pale. His phone hung limply in his hand, still recording. The video that he'd meant to be a joke, a mockery of a homeless man's delusions, had become something else entirely. Evidence of his own cruelty. Proof that he'd almost prevented something beautiful from happening. James sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed. The pain in his hand was screaming now, but he barely felt it. The applause washed over him like a wave, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt something other than shame and grief. He felt seen. The elderly woman reached the piano, moving faster than her age should have allowed. She grabbed James by the shoulders, looking directly into his face. "James Mitchell," she said, her voice breaking. "After all these years, I thought I'd never see you again. I thought you were dead." James stared at her, confused. His mind was still foggy from the performance, from the emotion of it all. Then recognition clicked into place and his eyes went wide. "Professor Whitmore," she nodded, tears flowing freely now. Yes, it's me." The crowd's applause began to fade as people realized something bigger was happening. Phones came back out. Everyone wanted to capture this moment. "I don't understand," James said, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" "I'm on the board now," she said. "I retired from Juilliard 10 years ago." "James, what happened to you? Where have you been?" Before he could answer, the artistic director of Carnegie Hall burst through the crowd, his face flushed. "Someone tell me what's going on out here. The concert is supposed to start and I'm getting reports of..." He stopped dead when he saw James at the piano. Who authorized this? Professor Whitmore turned to him sharply. Richard, be quiet. Do you have any idea who this man is? The artistic director, Richard, looked between Professor Whitmore and James with growing confusion. The lobby remained silent, everyone watching, waiting to understand what was happening. This man, Professor Whitmore said, her voice steady despite her tears, is James Mitchell. 30 years ago, he performed on the stage of this very hall. Critics called him the most promising pianist of his generation. He was my student at Juilliard, and he was going to change classical music forever. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. People started whispering, pulling out their phones to search the name. Richard's face went from annoyed to stunned in seconds. James Mitchell? The soldier pianist? But Richard's voice trailed off. Everyone thought you died, or disappeared. There were articles. People tried to find you after you stopped performing. James stood slowly from the piano bench, his legs unsteady. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him. All these people, all these phones recording, all this attention. It was too much. Way too much. He looked toward the door, calculating if he could make it out before anyone stopped him. Professor Whitmore seemed to read his mind. She gently touched his arm. James, please don't run. Not again. I need to go, James said quietly. His breathing was getting faster, the edges of panic starting to creep in. This was a mistake. Coming inside was a mistake. Playing was a mistake. He should have stayed invisible. Sir, Elena stepped forward, her voice calm and kind. You're not in any trouble. Nobody's going to hurt you. But I think these people would like to understand what just happened. James shook his head. They don't need to understand anything. I played the piano. That's it. Can I just leave? But the crowd wasn't parting. They weren't blocking him exactly, but they weren't moving either. Everyone seemed frozen, waiting for something, though James wasn't sure what. Peterson, who'd been standing silent this whole time, finally spoke up. His voice was different now, smaller. I'm the one who should leave. I'm the one who... He stopped, looking at his phone, then at James. I recorded the whole thing. I was going to post it online and laugh about it. I was going to humiliate you. James looked at him for a long moment. I know. I'm sorry, Peterson said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. I'm really sorry. I don't know what I thought. That you were lying. That all homeless people are lying. But you weren't. And I was being cruel just because I could be. One of Peterson's friends, the tall one, stepped forward too. We all were. We treated you like you weren't human. Like you were just some entertainment. It happens every day, James said quietly. You're not special. People look through me like I'm invisible. You just happen to see me long enough to mock me. Honestly, that's more attention than most people give. The words hung in the air, making several people in the crowd look away uncomfortably. Professor Whitmore guided James to a bench against the wall. Sit down, please, your hand is shaking. James sat, cradling his right hand. Now that the adrenaline was fading, the pain was intense. The scars were bright red, inflamed from the exertion. Professor Whitmore saw it and gasped softly. What happened to your hand? Roadside bomb, Afghanistan, second deployment. James spoke in short sentences, the way he always did when talking about the war. Destroyed most of the tendons. They said I'd never play again. But you did. You just did. She gestured toward the piano. Took 2 years. Physical therapy every day. It hurt so much I'd throw up sometimes. But I got it back mostly. He flexed his fingers, wincing. Never quite the same. Never as fast or as strong, but enough to play. Richard, the artistic director, had been listening intently. So you've been playing all these years? Performing somewhere else? James laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, I haven't touched a piano in 7 years. Tonight was the first time since... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Since what? Professor Whitmore asked gently. James was quiet for a long moment. The crowd leaned in, straining to hear. Finally, he spoke. Since my wife and daughter died. Car accident. Drunk driver. I was supposed to be in that car with them, but I stayed home because I was practicing. I chose the piano over them and they died. Several people in the crowd made soft sounds of sympathy. Professor Whitmore's hand went to her mouth. After that, I couldn't play anymore. Every time I sat at a piano, all I could see was that choice. Me staying home to practice while they went out without me. The piano felt like the reason they were gone. So I stopped. I sold my keyboard, avoided music, tried to forget I ever knew how to play. But the PTSD from the war, the grief from losing your family. Professor Whitmore's voice was barely a whisper. James, did you get help? Did anyone know what you were going through? James shook his head. I pushed everyone away. You sent letters. Other people from Juilliard reached out. Some of my army friends tried to check on me. But I didn't want help. I just wanted to disappear, and eventually I did. He gestured at his worn clothes, his weathered face. 7 years on the streets. Different cities. Different shelters when it got too cold. Nobody knows who I used to be. Nobody cares. I cared, Professor Whitmore said firmly. I never stopped caring. I tried to find you for years. Hired investigators, called hospitals and veteran services, nothing. It was like you'd vanished. I wanted to vanish, James said simply. Elena had been standing nearby, listening to everything. Now she spoke up. Why did you come here tonight? To Carnegie Hall specifically? James looked at the floor. I don't know. I was sitting out there with my sign, same as always. But I could hear the orchestra warming up and it was playing Rachmaninoff. The same piece I performed here 30 years ago on that stage. I guess I just wanted to be close to it one more time. To remember what it felt like when music was still beautiful instead of painful. And then we happened, Peterson said quietly. We forced you to play. We were going to humiliate you on video. You did me a favor, James said, looking up at him. I never would have played on my own. I'd decided years ago that part of my life was over. But you pushed me and I played and... He paused, seeming surprised by his own words. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. The memories were there, all the pain was there, but the music was still beautiful. I'd forgotten it could still be beautiful. Professor Whitmore was crying again, but this time she was smiling too. You still have it, James, everything that made you special. It's all still there. My hand barely works. I'm homeless. I haven't practiced in 7 years. Professor, I'm not that person anymore. Yes, you are, she insisted. You just played one of the most difficult pieces in classical repertoire from memory, with a damaged hand after years away from the piano. Do you understand how impossible that should be? Do you understand that most professional pianists couldn't do what you just did? Richard cleared his throat. She's right. I've been running this hall for 20 years. I've heard thousands of pianists. What you just did? I've never heard anything like it. The technical skill was impressive, but the emotion, the depth. You weren't just playing notes. You were telling a story. The story of my life, James said softly. A young woman from the crowd stepped forward. She looked like she was in her 20s, well-dressed, professional. Mr. Mitchell, I work for the New York Times. Would you be willing to do an interview? People need to hear this story. I don't think... There are over 50 people in this lobby right now with videos of your performance, she continued. They're already posting them online. By tomorrow morning, millions of people are going to know about the homeless veteran who played Rachmaninoff at Carnegie Hall. You can either let them make up their own story about you, or you can tell the truth. James felt dizzy. Millions of people. Videos online. His face, his story spread everywhere. The invisible man suddenly visible to everyone. Peterson looked at his own phone, scrolling through something. She's right. I posted my video 10 minutes ago and it already has 50,000 views. People are sharing it everywhere. Comments are going crazy. He turned the phone so James could see. The video showed everything. Peterson mocking him, the crowd expecting him to fail, and then the music. The transformation. The moment when everyone realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The comments scrolled past. Hundreds of them coming in every second. This made me cry. Who is this man? Someone find him and help him. I've been playing piano for 15 years and I couldn't do what he just did. This is what talent really looks like. We treat homeless people like they're nothing, but they're people with whole lives and stories. James read the comments with a strange feeling in his chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. For 7 years he'd been invisible. For 7 years he'd believed that he deserved to be invisible. That the man he used to be had died with his wife and daughter, and all that was left was someone who didn't matter. But these strangers on the internet, they saw something different. They saw someone worth paying attention to. Someone whose story mattered. Professor Whitmore squeezed his shoulder. James, please. Let me help you. There are programs for veterans, resources for people dealing with PTSD and grief. You don't have to live on the streets anymore. I don't have anything, James said. No money, no place to live, no— You have your gift, she interrupted. You have your music. And now you have people who want to help. Please don't disappear again. Please let us help you find your way back. James looked around the lobby, at all these people watching him with concern and curiosity and something that looked like admiration, at Elena, who'd shown him kindness when she didn't have to, at Peterson, who'd learned a hard lesson about judging people, at Professor Whitmore, who'd never given up looking for him. For the first time in 7 years, James let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way forward. 3 months later, James stood backstage at Carnegie Hall adjusting his bow tie with trembling fingers. The tuxedo felt strange after years of wearing the same worn jacket. Everything felt strange, actually. Clean clothes. A warm apartment. Regular meals. Sometimes he still woke up in the middle of the night, confused about where he was, expecting to find himself back on a cold sidewalk. You okay? Professor Whitmore appeared beside him, elegant in a dark blue dress. She'd barely left his side these past 3 months, helping him navigate the overwhelming process of rebuilding a life from nothing. Nervous, James admitted. More nervous than I've ever been. You've performed here before. That was different. I was different. He looked down at his hands. The right one still bore its scars, still ached when he played too long. But it worked. That was enough. Back then I was playing for critics and for my career. Tonight I'm playing for people who actually need it. Through the curtain, James could hear the audience filling the hall. This wasn't a normal Carnegie Hall crowd. Professor Whitmore and Richard had made sure of that. Yes, there were wealthy donors and board members, but there were also veterans, homeless people from local shelters, volunteers from veteran services and families who'd lost someone to war or PTSD or addiction. The benefit concert had been Professor Whitmore's idea. After that night in the lobby, after the videos had gone viral and James's story had spread across the internet, the donations had started pouring in. Money for homeless veterans, for PTSD treatment programs, for music therapy services. Over $500,000 in just 3 months. People want to help, Professor Whitmore had told him. Your story made them see what they'd been walking past every day without noticing. Now they want to do something about it. But James had insisted on one condition. If people were giving money because of him, because of his music, then he needed to do his part. He needed to play. One concert, all proceeds going to veteran causes. His first real performance in 7 years. The thought terrified him. Elena peeked through the curtain, checking on the audience. She'd become a friend over these months, helping James adjust to being visible again after so long being invisible. It's packed. Every single seat, and there are people outside watching on the screens they set up in the plaza. James's stomach dropped. How many people outside? Couple hundred, maybe more. Elena smiled. James, the whole world saw that video. Everyone wants to see what happens next. What had happened next over these 3 months had been overwhelming in the best and worst ways. Professor Whitmore had connected James with veteran services that specialized in PTSD treatment. Therapy 3 times a week, sometimes more when the nightmares got bad. Talking about Afghanistan, about the explosion, about coming home and never feeling like he truly left the war behind. Talking about Catherine and Lisa had been harder. 7 years of buried grief had to come out somehow, and it came out ugly. Crying jags that lasted hours. Days where he couldn't get out of bed. Moments when he wanted to run back to the streets because, at least out there, he didn't have to feel so much. But his therapist, Dr. Chen, had been patient. Healing isn't linear, she'd told him. Some days you'll feel like you're making progress. Other days you'll feel like you're back at the beginning. That's normal. That's how this works. The physical recovery had been easier in some ways. A small apartment in Queens paid for by a fund that Professor Whitmore had quietly organized. Regular meals meant he'd gained back some of the weight he'd lost living on the streets. Medical care for his hand had reduced the chronic pain, though it would never fully go away.